there are two different levels. We need to do different. You mentioned the first three levels. The first level being, what was the first level before operational again?
It was like your business model.
Your business. So the business model is one aspect that we need to take into consideration if you're trying to create a framework for ethical leadership. Second would be the operational effectiveness and efficiency. And third would be the leadership, and you broke that down into character, values, habits, and skills. That's all makes sense, and I think most people would nod their head and say, yeah, I would agree with that. But you also mentioned, I think a little bit earlier on, that de facto, if we look at our leaders that we have, I think there's a disproportionate number of psychologists. There's all sorts of articles that talk about how only 7% of the world's population fall into the category of sociopath or psychopaths, but they're overrepresented in criminal behavior, and they're also overrepresented in the C-suite. I don't know how much of that is polemic. I think there's some legitimacy. I don't know if the numbers are correct, but I think it's also partly our society or our corporations' fault for the leaders we pick. What about these negative examples of leaders that make them so compelling to pick? And what would we have to do to pick better leaders? Do you have a concept for that?
This is a complicated question. I've mentioned it before in the beginning, pointing out that my motivation to turn towards the topic of ethics is that basically in my life I've met a lot of these kind of bullies who come out the winners, right? Yeah. And ultimately, I think it is a systemic problem, right? So how do these bullies become these C-suite leaders? Although they have maybe a psychological condition. And the reason is because they get elected by their boards, right? And then you have to ask who's sitting on those boards. And well, it's the people who own these companies. And the owners, really they're motivated by greed, and they want to maximize their own income without having to do anything with the dirty work involved. So they hire those people who do the dirty work for them. And those psychopaths, they will willingly do this work. And all that in a cultural context where they are admired business leaders with successful companies, and from the outside it's all sugar coated, but on the inside, it is really all about taking advantage. And I think that is there's a solution to that. I mean, this is a freewheeling capitalism, and I'm a total capitalist. I think this is the only way that resources are allocated efficiently. But clearly, if you exaggerate it, it will have negative externalities.
Well, I think
these negative externalities are typically exactly the ethical problems we are talking about. It's the destruction of the environment. It is the impoverishment of all parts of the society. It is unfair business practices and the suffering of the people who then work for those businesses. It is the disenfranchisement of consumers. You name it. I mean, there's so many problems associated with that, but it starts with the greed of the business owners.
Well, you mentioned this before when we talked about social shaming. I think the problem that we have is that anything that's uncontrolled. I'm also a capitalist at heart, but I'm a fan of ethical capitalism, and I believe that that's not a misnomer. I believe that's a possibility. I think that an unchecked and uncontrolled capitalism makes greed its number one principle, and I think that's also at the heart of the competitive market. And I think far too many companies see their transactional relationship with society as a form of war. So I think that's definitely a problem. I believe that. I believe one of the problems that kind of promotes this kind of behavior is an insufficient amount of consequence and accountability at a high level if you make a mistake. I mean, if presidents can pardon themselves and everybody who's involved, that doesn't set the right example. If you're a poor person and go into a gas station and you steal a Mars bar, and you get life sentence for it, but a Bernie Madoff who's ripped off millions is secretly, subconsciously celebrated as a hey, he's a real stud because he managed to take advantage of the system. I think we've got a serious issue here. I also think that there is a political responsibility that is missing. I think the purpose, and I've had two guests on where we talked about the lack of leadership in politics. I believe that the true purpose of government is not to overregulate, but in that sense, create a framework that has accountability. That they should be working. A lot of people say government is here to protect the minorities from the majority. I think quite the contrary. I think that the government is here to protect the 99% of the population from the 0.01% who would take advantage if you let them. All right. And you've kind of mentioned it before, and I think part of the problem we have with ethics is that a lot of these bad players are buying the legal system, they're buying the politics. But we're kind of going off on a tangent here.
But maybe you have your finger on a very important aspect here, because the politicians, and this is something that you can really compare to the business leaders as well. But the politicians really often try to cater to certain constituents, and they will, for example, say, well, my constituents who normally vote for me, they are racist, so I'll be a little bit racist too, so I can still, they'll still like me and they'll still vote for me. And what they don't do is to tell their constituents, look, it's not good to be racist. It's a very bad development that you, my beloved constituents, are now becoming racist. Please listen to me. We shouldn't be racist. There's other solutions. There's other attitudes that we can have to solve our problems, our real problems, maybe with immigration, what have you, right? So that is a dynamic you find very often. Like, am I being influenced by what is always framed as an inevitable necessity? Because you can say, okay, I cannot become a racist, I won't get elected, and then I'm out. There's no influence now. It's better I stay a little bit racist, and then I can maybe do policies that I find still important. I think that the center-right parties in many European countries operate exactly like that. And it is, of course, a very, very wrong approach, because we know it's a slippery slope towards deterioration of values. And the answer is, of course, exactly like what's in the headline, the leadership. If you don't have leadership, that means that you also have leadership of ideas. Obviously, maybe we can have a short-term success in an election, but the long-term, I think it's very well analyzed. The long-term, you will lose. So that is really what we need. We need leaders who actually have ideas and who have who want to be chosen because of their ideas and not because of their willingness to be subservient to the.
I think you're